First, though, let's talk about the data breach again, and let's talk to international security expert, great friend of TalkTV, Will Geddes. Morning, Will.
Morning, Kev.
Now, before we get to the general picture here, let's talk about in Northern Ireland. This is where they used the phrase that this data breach was on a monumental scale, and most concerning is the fact that police officers, thousands of police officers, they think, had their details compromised. Presumably, that would extend to police officers in England, Wales and Scotland as well. And that's where this kind of breach of security becomes very, very worrying, isn't it?
Well, yeah, hugely. I mean, this breach on the PSNI's database is probably more serious than almost the Electoral Commission one, and I'll come on to that when we talk about that in a moment. But in terms of the PSNI's data breach, this was down to a poor management process within the PSNI when a subject access request was placed, from what I understand. And what was particularly concerning was not only did it list all the names of the various police officers within the PSNI, but it named them specifically. If you clicked on the second tab within this spreadsheet, which was obviously inadvertently disclosed, it actually goes into the specific departments that many of these PSNI officers by name were operating in, including in Holywood, the officers actually attached to MI5. Now, this involved organised crime investigations, a lot of the covert operations. You know, this was very, very concerning because where that information can be utilised by the enemy and by criminals would be in reverse engineering that against social media accounts, against electoral registers, all sorts of things. So there is almost a connection between the electoral register disclosure or hack and also this PSNI inadvertent release.
And what about the general hacking that's gone on, which we believe is down to the Russians, down to Putin's bad actors? 40 million details, names, addresses, etc., gleaned from the electoral rolls. Again, that is worrying to the majority of people who live in this country.
It is. I mean, the data, to a certain extent, itself, in its sort of core sense, isn't necessarily that revealing. You can find out a lot of this information in the public domain. There are various websites like 192.com that you can subscribe to, and you can pull up electoral registry details for individuals across the country. But where this information, again, can be utilized would be more through manipulation, which is why my assessment, and I think other security sort of analysts' assessment, is that it's more about manipulation of data. And where this could potentially be utilized by bad actors, if you want, would be to manipulate that data to create distrust. Now, there's no passwords being held on there other than those who have communicated directly with the Electoral Commission. And beyond that, really, it's more about your details since 2014. But the biggest concern for me, Kev, more than anything else, is it took 14 months for the Electoral Commission to realise this has even happened.
Indeed. I mean, this is terrible, worrying inefficiency. What could these bad actors, let's say it's Russia, what can they do with these details that they've hacked, compromised in terms of the thousands of officers in Northern Ireland? And who knows, they might have done it in Britain as well. What could the Russians do with that?
Well, the Russians probably, again, it could be very useful, sort of just standard intelligence for them about our law enforcement agencies and what is being utilized, certainly in terms of those connected with domestic security services. But it's more the concern from the real IRA, who are still very much a threat, Kev. And it's those individuals that are operating under the wire, doing their own little operations, their criminality, that could potentially draw lists of individuals and particular names to particular departments, which they could then intimidate. Now, it's a question of not only targeting the officer directly, but it could be targeting family members. It could be targeting friends, and again, utilizing as collateral and leverage for some of their criminal operations and coercing police officers into compromising situations. So the PSNI thing is really probably the most concerning. The electoral registry, yeah, absolutely. It's incompetence by the electoral register, and the Information Commissioner's Officer, I hope, is all over it. But it's the release of data. You know, the Electoral Commission was hacked. The PSNI was human error, and that was human error on the inside of the PSNI.
Extraordinary. I mean, do we need to tighten up security around this kind of information generally? As I was saying earlier in the show, as a British citizen, I can walk into a town hall or I can get it online. I have the right to look at electoral rolls. I mean, do we need to have a look at it? I don't like secrecy. I'm a journalist. I prefer disclosure. But sometimes it is required. Do we need to be more careful about the information that we're allowed to access? Are we allowed to access too much information?
Yeah, although you know, Kev, as you know full well, my world involves a lot of secrecy.
Yeah, we're on opposite sides of the fence, aren't we?
Well, to a certain extent, although I do agree with you, and I think we need to be able to know what big agencies, what big corporations have in terms of information on us personally, what data has been collected, because the whole thing has become incredibly opaque in terms of how that data is collected. You know, when we click onto websites, it will say accept cookies or selected cookies. Most of us are time sensitive, and we won't necessarily go through that checklist of which data we want to give. And some people may not even understand what data they're necessarily relinquishing to big data or to major corporations. So I think subject access requests are very important. I think they should be always afforded to us, that we can find out what people do have on us. However, that data, for our reassurance, if it has been collected knowingly or unknowingly, should be protected securely and should have the measures in place to ensure that nobody else can get sight on personal data about you or I.
Well, great to talk to you as always. That's Will Geddes, international security expert.